The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of northern Georgia as Sarah Martinez pulled into the gravel parking lot of Wildwood Animal Sanctuary. At 28, she had dedicated the last 5 years of her life to rehabilitating injured wildlife, but nothing could have prepared her for what she would discover that October morning. "Coffee's fresh," called out Marcus Thompson, the sanctuary's senior veterinarian, as Sarah pushed through the heavy wooden doors. The familiar scent of hay and disinfectant filled her nostrils, mixed with the earthy aroma of the surrounding pine forest. Marcus, a tall man in his 50s with graying temples, had been Sarah's mentor since she first arrived as a nervous volunteer fresh out of college. "Thanks, I'll need it," Sarah replied, grabbing her favorite ceramic mug, a gift from a grateful family whose injured hawk they had successfully released. "How's our new resident doing?" She was referring to Jasper, a young bobcat who had been brought in 3 weeks earlier. A local farmer had found him near death beside a country road, his left hind leg mangled, probably from a car strike. The Georgia Department of Natural Resources had contacted Wildwood, knowing their reputation for handling difficult cases. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about," Marcus said, his expression growing serious. "Something's happened." Sarah's stomach tightened. In her experience, when Marcus used that tone, it usually meant bad news. Had Jasper's condition worsened? She had grown particularly attached to the young bobcat, spending extra hours working with him during his recovery. His wild amber eyes held an intelligence that reminded her why she had chosen this difficult but rewarding career path. They walked together down the long corridor lined with various enclosures. The sanctuary housed everything from injured birds of prey to orphaned deer, each in specially designed habitats that mimicked their natural environments. The October sun streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. "Last night, around midnight, old Mrs. Patterson from the farm down the road called," Marcus began. "Said she found something by her barn, a tiny kitten. Couldn't have been more than 4 weeks old. Mother was nowhere to be found, probably taken by a coyote or owl." Sarah nodded, familiar with such stories. Rural Georgia was full of feral cat colonies, and tragedy was unfortunately common. "Did you bring it in? That's where it gets interesting." Marcus paused at the door leading to the bobcat enclosure. "I was exhausted, figured I'd set up a temporary space in the morning. So I put the kitten in the empty enclosure next to Jasper's, just for the night." Through the reinforced glass window, Sarah could see Jasper's spacious enclosure. It was designed to replicate his natural habitat with fallen logs, dense vegetation, and a small stream that meandered through artificial rocks. She had spent countless hours observing him, documenting his recovery progress, watching as his injured leg slowly healed and his natural hunting instincts returned. "Sarah," Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. "Look." She pressed her face to the glass and gasped. There, in a sunny spot beneath a cluster of artificial ferns, lay Jasper, the powerful bobcat. Nearly 30 pounds of pure muscle and wild instinct was carefully grooming a tiny orange and white kitten. His rough tongue moved gently across the kitten's fur, while the little one purred so loudly they could hear it through the glass. "How is this possible?" Sarah whispered, her scientific mind racing. Bobcats were solitary predators. They didn't form social bonds, especially not with potential prey. Everything she had learned about feline behavior suggested this scene should be impossible. "I found them like this at 6 this morning," Marcus said, his voice filled with the same wonder Sarah felt. The kitten must have somehow gotten through the barrier between the enclosures during the night. By all logic, Jasper should have. He didn't need to finish. They both knew what typically happened when wild predators encountered small, vulnerable animals. But this was different. This defied every textbook, every case study Sarah had ever read. The kitten, seemingly oblivious to the impossibility of the situation, stretched and yawned, then snuggled closer to Jasper's warm fur. The bobcat's amber eyes met Sarah's through the glass, and for a moment she could have sworn she saw something almost paternal in his gaze. "We need to separate them," Sarah said, though her heart rebelled against the words. "This isn't natural. It's not safe." "I know," Marcus replied, but he made no move toward the enclosure. "But look at them, Sarah. Look how calm Jasper is. Look how the kitten trusts him." As if responding to their conversation, Jasper lifted his head and gently nuzzled the tiny kitten, who responded by attempting to knead the bobcat's thick fur with his miniature paws. It was a scene of such tenderness that Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Outside, the Georgia sun climbed higher, casting dappled light through the enclosure's carefully designed canopy. Somewhere in the distance, a red-tailed hawk called out, its cry echoing across the sanctuary grounds. But inside the enclosure, two unlikely companions rested peacefully together, challenging everything Sarah thought she knew about the natural world. Marcus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I think," he said slowly, "we observe, we document, and we see where this incredible story leads us." Sarah nodded, pulling out her phone to begin recording what might be the most extraordinary animal behavior she had ever witnessed. As she focused the camera, one question echoed in her mind. How could something so impossible feel so completely right? 3 days had passed since the discovery, and the small town of Pine Ridge, Georgia, was buzzing with whispers about the unusual pair at Wildwood Sanctuary. Sarah had barely slept, spending most of her time observing and documenting the extraordinary relationship between Jasper and the kitten they had named Scout, after his apparent talent for finding his way into impossible situations. Dr. Rebecca Chen, a renowned animal behaviorist from the University of Georgia, had driven up that morning to witness the phenomenon firsthand. Sarah watched nervously as the distinguished professor examined her carefully compiled notes and video footage. "In 30 years of studying predator behavior, I've never seen anything quite like this," Dr. Chen admitted, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses as she observed the pair through the enclosure window. "Bobcats are typically solitary, territorial animals. This maternal behavior toward an unrelated species is unprecedented." Jasper was demonstrating that very behavior at that moment, carefully carrying Scout by the scruff of his neck to a sunny spot near the artificial stream. The kitten, now noticeably plumper after 3 days of Jasper's care, seemed completely at ease with his unusual guardian. "The question is," Dr. Chen continued, "what triggered this response? Jasper is a young male, not a mother who might have residual maternal instincts." Sarah had been pondering the same question. She had reviewed every detail of Jasper's rescue and recovery, looking for clues. "He was found alone," she said thoughtfully. "The vet who first examined him estimated he was just reaching sexual maturity, old enough to be independent, but young enough that social bonds might still be possible." Marcus joined them, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a folder thick with veterinary records. The October air was crisp, and the changing leaves created a beautiful backdrop of gold and crimson around the sanctuary. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "What if Jasper's injury and recovery period created a psychological state that made him more receptive to bonding?" Dr. Chen's eyebrows rose with interest. "Explain." "Well, he was severely injured, probably in pain and vulnerable for the first time in his life. We provided care, safety, food. Essentially, we became his substitute family structure. Maybe that experience opened him up to forming attachments he wouldn't normally form in the wild." Through the glass, they watched Scout attempt to pounce on Jasper's twitching tail. The bobcat tolerated the kitten's playful attacks with remarkable patience, occasionally batting gently back with his massive paws, claws carefully retracted. "It's beautiful," whispered Emma Rodriguez, a local news reporter who had gotten wind of the story. Sarah had reluctantly agreed to let her document the situation, hoping that positive media attention might help with the sanctuary's chronic funding issues. "How are you feeding Scout?" "That's the most remarkable part," Sarah explained. "Jasper has been sharing his food. We put out Scout's kitten food separately, but Jasper actually carries pieces of his own meat to Scout, then watches to make sure he eats." Emma's camera captured this very behavior as they spoke. Jasper delicately picked up a small piece of rabbit and placed it near Scout, then settled down to watch the kitten eat. When Scout was finished, Jasper resumed his own meal. "The public response has been incredible," Emma said, reviewing the footage on her camera. The video I posted yesterday has over 200,000 views. People are calling from all over the country asking about them. Sarah felt a mix of pride and concern. While the attention might help fund the sanctuary's operations, she worried about the pressure it might put on their unusual residents. Jasper was still a wild animal recovering from serious injuries, and Scout was just a baby who needed stability and routine. Dr. Chen seemed to read her thoughts. Have you considered the long-term implications? Jasper will eventually need to be evaluated for release back into the wild, and Scout will need a permanent home. The question Sarah had been dreading. She had fallen in love with both animals, but their future was complicated by their extraordinary bond. Could Jasper ever be successfully released if he remained attached to Scout? Could Scout thrive as a domestic cat if separated from his protective guardian? We're taking it day by day, Marcus said diplomatically, but Sarah caught the worry in his eyes. That afternoon, as the media crew packed up their equipment, Sarah sat alone in the observation area. The October sun was setting earlier each day, casting long shadows across the enclosure. Jasper and Scout were settled together in their favorite spot, a hollow between two large logs that Jasper had carefully arranged with fallen leaves to create a cozy nest. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister in Atlanta. "Saw you on the news. Mom's so proud. This is amazing, Sarah." She smiled, but the weight of responsibility felt heavier than ever. Dozens of messages had poured in from wildlife experts, veterinarians, and animal lovers around the world. Some offered advice, others criticism. A few suggested separating the animals immediately, arguing that their bond was unhealthy and dangerous. But watching them together, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled upon something truly special, a glimpse into the more compassionate side of nature that textbooks rarely captured. Scout stretched and padded over to the water dish, his tiny pink tongue lapping at the fresh water Marcus had provided. Jasper followed closely, positioning himself protectively between the kitten and the enclosure's entrance, a behavior Sarah had noticed whenever Scout was in what Jasper perceived as a vulnerable position. "What are you trying to teach us?" Sarah whispered to the pair, her breath fogging the glass. As if in response, Jasper's golden eyes met hers once again. In that gaze, Sarah saw not the wild, wary look of a predator, but something deeper, perhaps the same capacity for love and protection that had driven her to dedicate her life to caring for injured animals. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening Georgia sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, and new decisions about the future of Jasper and Scout. But tonight, two unlikely friends rested safely together, their extraordinary bond continuing to challenge everything the world thought it knew about the boundaries between species. 2 weeks had passed since Dr. Chen's visit, and the story of Jasper and Scout had captured hearts around the world. The sanctuary's social media following had exploded from a modest few hundred to over 100,000, with people checking in daily for updates on the unlikely pair. But with fame came pressure, and Sarah found herself facing the most difficult decision of her career. The morning air carried the first real chill of November as Sarah walked the familiar path to the Bobcat enclosure. The Georgia mountains were painted in brilliant autumn colors, but she barely noticed the beauty around her. In her hand, she carried a thick folder containing recommendations from wildlife experts, veterinarians, and behavioral specialists from across the country. Marcus was already there, sitting on the wooden bench they had installed for the countless hours of observation. His expression was grave, and Sarah knew they were both thinking the same thing. "The Department of Natural Resources called again," he said without preamble. "They're getting pressure from multiple sources. Some are saying we're anthropomorphizing the situation, that keeping them together is interfering with natural selection." Sarah sat beside him, watching as Jasper carefully groomed Scout's face with gentle licks. The kitten, now noticeably larger and more active, purred loudly and attempted to return the favor by licking Jasper's massive paw. "Dr. Patterson from the Wildlife Federation believes we should separate them immediately," Sarah said, her voice heavy. She argues that Jasper's rehabilitation is being compromised by his attachment to Scout, and that we're preventing him from developing proper predatory instincts. And on the other side, Marcus added, Dr. Chen thinks we've stumbled onto something that could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies bonding. She wants to continue the study. They had received calls from major zoos, wildlife parks, and research institutions. Some wanted to take both animals for study, others offered substantial donations to continue housing them at Wildwood. The financial pressure was real. The sanctuary operated on a shoestring budget, and the sudden influx of visitors and media attention had strained their resources. There's something else, Marcus said quietly. I got Scout's blood work back from the lab. He's completely healthy, strong enough for adoption. Dr. Wilson from the Pine Ridge Veterinary Clinic called this morning. She has a family interested in him. Good people, experienced with cats. Sarah's heart clenched. She had known this moment would come, but she wasn't prepared for how much it would hurt. Scout had become more than just another rescue animal. He was a symbol of hope, of the unexpected connections that could form when the world seemed increasingly divided. Inside the enclosure, Jasper had positioned himself in his usual protective stance, while Scout played with a fallen leaf. The Bobcat's amber eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert for any potential threats to his tiny charge. It was a behavior they had documented dozens of times. Jasper's natural predatory instincts had been redirected into fierce protectiveness. What does your gut tell you? Sarah asked, though she already knew Marcus's answer. My gut says we're witnessing something extraordinary that we don't fully understand, he replied. But my head says we have responsibilities to both animals that go beyond our emotional attachment to their story. The sound of gravel crunching announced the arrival of Dr. Elena Vasquez, the state wildlife veterinarian who would ultimately make the official recommendation about Jasper's future. Sarah had been dreading this meeting for days. Dr. Vasquez was a stern woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that had seen decades of wildlife management decisions. She examined Sarah's meticulously kept records without comment, occasionally glancing through the observation window at the pair inside. I've reviewed the documentation, she said finally. Jasper's physical recovery is remarkable. His leg has healed completely, his weight is optimal, and his muscle tone suggests he's ready for release evaluation. Sarah's hands clenched involuntarily. But his behavior is problematic. A successful release requires that he maintain appropriate fear of humans and proper hunting instincts. His attachment to the kitten suggests emotional dependency that could compromise his survival in the wild. Through the glass, they watched Scout attempt to climb onto Jasper's back, his tiny claws catching in the bobcat's thick fur. Jasper remained perfectly still, allowing the kitten to use him as a jungle gym. However, Dr. Vasquez continued, I've also reviewed the behavioral documentation provided by Dr. Chen. This case presents unique research opportunities that could significantly advance our understanding of wildlife psychology. She paused, studying the animals with a clinical eye that Sarah had learned to read over the years. I'm recommending a compromise, she said finally. Scout should be placed with the adoptive family within the week. Jasper will undergo a 90-day behavioral assessment to determine if the separation allows his wild instincts to re-emerge. If successful, he'll be released. If not, Marcus prompted. If not, he'll need permanent placement in an accredited facility that can provide appropriate long-term care. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had always known that their job was to heal and release, but this felt different. They weren't just separating animals, they were breaking up a family. That evening, as the sanctuary settled into quiet, Sarah made one final visit to the enclosure. Jasper and Scout were curled together in their usual spot, the kitten's tiny form barely visible beneath the bobcat's protective embrace. She had made her decision. Tomorrow, she would call the adoptive family and arrange for Scout's transition. It was the right thing to do, for Scout's future as a domestic cat, for Jasper's chance at freedom, and for the sanctuary's mission. But tonight, She allowed herself to simply watch them sleep, two unlikely souls who had found comfort in each other during their time of need. Their story had touched millions of people around the world, reminding everyone that love and protection could transcend the boundaries that usually separate species. As Sarah finally turned to leave, Jasper opened his golden eyes and looked directly at her. In that gaze, she saw understanding, as if he knew that change was coming and had accepted it with the quiet dignity of a wild creature who had learned to trust the humans who had cared for him. "Thank you for teaching us about love," she whispered, her words barely audible in the quiet Georgia night. Outside, the November stars shone brilliantly above the sanctuary, witnessing the end of one of the most extraordinary animal relationships ever documented. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult goodbyes, but the bond between Jasper and Scout had already left an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed it. Their story would continue to inspire long after they were separated, a testament to the unexpected connections that can form when hearts are open to the possibility of love in its most unconditional form.